All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to the open house of the Socialist Party National Office and the kickoff of our 40th anniversary campaign of the Socialist Party USA. This month, across the United States, there will be events marking the 40th anniversary of the reconstitution of the Socialist Party USA. Now, the Socialist Party has a history over 100 years. We go back 112 years to the founding in 1901 in Indianapolis. But this specific group, this specific branch of the party, really formed in 1973 with the reconstitution in Milwaukee. In 1972, after a few years, the right wing of the party really took over, and the party was leaning towards supporting the Vietnam War and trying to merge within the Democratic Party. The Socialist Party had a long tradition of independent political action, anti-war activism, and there were many locals and activists who were very upset with this. So, the older branch of the party became the Social Democrats USA. And many locals and individuals reconstituted in 1973 as the Socialist Party USA with our first chairperson, Frank Seidler. There's actually a cover of the Socialist Tribune here, and it says, "The continuation of the Socialist Party USA assured." So this month we'll be celebrating the 40th anniversary across the U.S., and tonight I'd like to introduce a few speakers who'd like to talk about our future and our present. First, I'd like to introduce our newest elected member, Pat Noble, who was elected to the Red Bank School Board. Pat?
So as Greg said, my name is Pat Noble. Last November I was elected to the Red Bank Regional High School School Board with 54% of the vote. We campaigned from probably June until November. And it's important to note that it was a nonpartisan race, and I ran in 2011 for the Loudoun County Freeholder partisan race on the ballot as Socialist Party. And in both campaigns, despite the differences, we maintained socialist values throughout the campaign, made sure that the voters knew as much as humanly possible that they were voting for socialism, for socialists, and promoted those ideas. In that spirit, I was elected. I've been on the board for about 5 months now, and looking forward towards the next 3 years.
We also have 2 more speakers today in this announcement. Next would be Larry Rockwood, who is chair of the New York State Socialist Party.
Thank you. And you know, one of the things when we think about our party being reconstituted, you know, in the early '70s, is I like to think about the continuity when we were constituted in the first place. You know, what did the two events have in common? What were we all about? What was our worldview? And it was amazing to me the continuity between those two things. When we were first, founded in 1903, right? 1901. I'm sorry, 1901. We had a strong connection, you know, with the peace movement. Our politics has always associated socialism with peace, and the idea is the attainment of peace is the blooming, is the effect of working for social justice, and that was always with us. One of our first political candidates when we first were constituted a party was Jessie Wallace Houlihan, who also was the secretary for the War Resisters League. And she ran for alderman in New York City, and she would, that really drives home. She was very much involved in constituting the War Resisters League, which really was constituted after World War I. How looking at the World War and how do we avoid another war? What's really the process of peace all about? And the process of peace, it makes sense to come out of a democratic socialist position. The process of peace is the attainment of social justice. And one of our next speaker, David McReynolds, he's also, no one's more associated with that tradition and that joining of those two concepts. Again, with the career of David McReynolds, who came out, who basically ran, administered the War Resisters League during the period around the Vietnam War, and was also very central in our reconstitution as a party. So, I think that really shows where we're going to go in the future. This is I think the core of what makes us who we are, and also the idea is our approach to democracy. throughout our history. You know, we've had a lot of different tendencies, a lot of different very famous intellectuals associated with our party. One of the things I think there's always consistency, whether we look at our reconstituted party and our original party, is the idea that socialism is the attainment of democracy, is the fruition of democracy. Socialism is going to come out of democracy. It's not going to be, there's not going to be a period where democracy is going to step back. Socialism is actually the flowering of democracy. And also the association with socialism and human rights, very much associated with our famous presidential candidate back in the 30s, Norman Thomas. Now, many people in the human rights field are really reassessing what does human rights entail, and it's more than just political rights, and it is basically social and economic rights is central to human rights, and that's been central to us throughout our history, and especially since we've been reconstituted. So we should, we're a party of differences. We're a party of tolerance and the toleration of differences. But we also have a continuity that we should be very proud of, and we should be. That's one of the things I'm here celebrating, is that continuity. Those things in our history that we should be proud of and cling to.
Thank you, Larry. We'll take questions afterwards. There were a few moments in our history since the Reconstitution. 73, our first presidential campaign with Frank Seidler in Quinton, Brisbane, but also the 1980 presidential campaign. 1980 was the time of the new moral majority, and the Socialist Party's response to that was to run the first openly gay presidential candidate, peace activist Dave McReynolds, and a Catholic nun, Sister Dion Dufrenbach. We think a balanced slate. And it was an incredibly important campaign, and right now I'd like to introduce David McReynolds to say a few words.
I think I'm supposed to sit back here. When Larry talked about World War I, in fact it was a little bit more complex. Not that he wasn't accurate, but one of the tragedies of that period, and we're seeing it again today, was the enormous support that that war had from American intellectuals. Eugene Victor Debs was actually unique, and the Socialist Party was unique, and it was divided. It wasn't by a massive majority the party voted its opposition to the war. And if you look back at that war, as I have many times, because I think the First World War laid the basis for the rise of the Nazis and made possible, for better or for worse, the Russian Revolution. If you look back at World War I, it was an utterly irrational war. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it would not have made any difference to the final history of the world if the West, and it was all the West at that time, if the Germans had just surrendered in the day after the war started, or if the French and the English had surrendered the day after the war started, the world would be a much better place if the war had just not been fought. And what is disturbing is the degree of intellectual support you can muster for very bad wars. One reason we had historically a good, strong anti-war position, for the most part, was that socialists could not conceive of any justifiable war. All wars were capitalist wars. And it was with the rise of the Soviet Union that, and the division that we had within the movement, in many ways a very tragic division, because many of those who supported the Soviet Union were very good people and very hard workers and very committed to radical social change. But in their defense of whatever the Soviets did, you saw the rise of the idea of the just war. And that has haunted us, and it haunted us in the case of Iraq, where idiotically we had widespread support from the New York Times and elsewhere for launching that war. Same is true of Afghanistan, and you're seeing it today on the question of Syria. Syria is a terrible government. I'm not interested in defending the Syrian government, but so are the opposition forces to Syria. And if they're armed and take power, they will be at least as bad as Assad. And we'll see a replay of what we have seen in Iraq. If you've been following Iraq, and no reason why you should, you've got lots of other stuff to follow. But if you've been following Iraq, the daily bombings and the killings are now approaching the level of a return to the civil war we saw after the Americans went into Iraq. So, and you're seeing a pressure in this, in one part from the supporters of Israel, who very much want to have another war with Syria. And I would just say, one of the problems we have is that there is so little serious examination of the role that Israel plays in making our foreign policy here. And I want to recommend two movies, both made by Israelis. And one of them is called Five Broken Cameras, and that shows you the conflict from the Palestinian point of view, but it was made by an Israeli. And the other is The Gatekeepers, again made by an Israeli, and most stunningly, an interview with all of the surviving members of Shin Bet. And Shin Bet is a very tough-minded internal security force in Israel. And you're talking to like the 5 former heads of the CIA or the 5 former heads of the FBI. These are guys who organized assassinations of Palestinians, and so on. It's a chilling film when you find out that one of the greatest threats, not much talked about, one of the greatest threats to Israel is from the right-wing religious extremists, which is discussed in the film and worth the price of admission. They very nearly blew up the Dome of the Rock, which would have started a religious war, which is doubtful that Israel could have survived. Anyway, I think, from my point of view, the Socialist Party wasn't reconstituted. I mean, I know that it was, but I think of myself as being a member of the Socialist Party going back to when I joined it in '51, which is a bit long ago. And I stayed in the party until 1971, when we all, if we're lucky, managed to make some huge mistake in our lives, sometimes many mistakes. And my enormous mistake was working for the admission of Max Shachtman and the Independent Socialist League to the Socialist Party, thinking that would lead to a broad and expanded socialist movement, bringing in people who were leaving the Communist Party and other independent socialists. Instead, Shachtman took over the party, and for reasons that are still not clear to me, supported the war in Vietnam, and I just found that impossible. I've been to Vietnam in 1966, I returned to Hanoi in '71, and at some point I felt a moral obligation to resign from the Socialist Party, so I did in 1971 and rejoined when it reorganized. But I still think of myself as part of that original network of left socialists who were, in my view, and this I don't want to argue much about the future. I'm not sure, I know we don't agree about that. I'm a member of DSA as well as the SP. I'm a member of the Committees of Correspondence for Democracy and Socialism, which is the group that left the Communist Party in '91. And I think the future lies in some kind of broad regroupment. But I think what is important for us is that we maintain a kind of intellectual line within the American society, which is crucial. It is, as has been mentioned, democratic, which is very important in reaching out to people, but it's also part, if you go back before Lenin, and I have a lot of respect for Lenin, I'm not here tonight to attack Lenin, but if you go back before Lenin to Marx, and instead of talking about Marx and Leninism, if you talk about the early Marx, You're talking about someone whose concept of change in society was fundamentally to democratize the society. It was fundamentally not a party that would rule over the workers. It was fundamentally the concept of the workers being able to take charge of society. So the early Marx is really worth reading and examining, less because of the theories of scientific socialism, which I think are a little bit suspect. That's another discussion. But for the human elements of Marxism, the effort to make it possible for human history to begin in a way that it has never had a chance. All of history up to this point, up to now, has been a struggle over who would control the means of production and, in a sense, be able to eat food and live and have a shelter. That's what owning the means of production means. It means that you can actually have a decent meal. And if you don't own the means of production, then you have what we have in this country today. You have 7% unemployment with vast numbers of others who are not able to find work. You have people totally demoralized because they feel they're on the scrap heap. They're 40 or 50 and out of work and can't get a job because they're too old. And what you have is a dehumanization of society as a result of capitalism. And if you are my age and look back, and if your age, you can think we're in a temporary, difficult position. But if you're my age and look back, in fact, outside of the extraordinary prosperity that followed World War II, was part of World War II and followed it for several years, aside from that, we have not had a period. This is a long time now. We're not talking about going back to '92. We're talking about way back. We have never had anything approaching full employment. We have never really had a war on poverty. We have never really eliminated the slums. We have never really carried through an economic program that would work. And the reason for this is that capitalism, as we know it, really has failed. It's not only failed here, it's also failed in Western Europe, where under various complex pressures of the world market, you've seen the retreat of the social democratic parties. But you've seen, even in those countries which have social democratic parties, the rise of unemployment to staggering levels in Spain and in Greece, and really, and in Italy, which really break the back of any social contract. So I think the idea of socialism is very much correct. The concept of it as democracy is important. We need to think of it less in terms of a sudden revolution which is going to change everything, as in terms of the social ownership of the primary means of production and control of the banking, the social control of the banking system, the banking credit system. Those are things that can be achieved. Not easily, but they can be achieved. I am not personally interested, others may be, but I'm not, in socializing all the barbers, all the drugstores, all the corner markets. I don't care if they are privately owned or not. In fact, I think there's a strong argument you can make that under a system where you have private ownership of small shops, there's an incentive for people to meet the demand that you don't have. I remember being in Moscow on one occasion and realizing that there wasn't going to be any little corner stand where I could buy postcards, because whereas here you would find postcards almost anywhere, and during a rainstorm you will find umbrellas 5 minutes before the rain starts to fall, and you can tell the rain is coming because they're out of the corner with umbrellas. That's a result of private enterprise. It's also a result of the fact they don't make much money. But there is an incentive for the small business person, and there wasn't in Moscow. And I thought about that as I was looking for postcards. They're just not available except at certain hours, certain days. But if you're just a tourist looking for the cards, forget it, you're not going to find them. So there are advantages to small business. But the great advantage is to cooperatively own businesses, great advantages to workers controlling the business. And we are now in a period, given the level of unemployment, given the failure to meet the human needs that are abundant, where I think a discussion of socialism is really possible as a thread in the intellectual fabric. How it will be achieved is very much open for debate, but I'm less concerned about that. But I am concerned that the concept of the social ownership of the basic means of production and the basic banking and credit system be in the hands of the people, not as some abstract state, but in a diffuse and decentralized way. One last comment when we think about change. North Dakota, which is not a radical state, very conservative state. North Dakota has a state bank, which was set up a long time ago, set up during the populist period. They don't have any credit problems in North Dakota because they have a state bank. It doesn't make wild investments. It's very cautiously run. Makes loans to farmers. It's been very helpful. I think New Yorkers, Californians, and others should look at North Dakota and realize the importance of a bank which just banks, doesn't invest, doesn't take risks, it just banks. And they've had a state bank in North Dakota all these years. They've managed to ride out the worst of the recent depression. They're still going. We ought to be able to put practical things like that before the American people.
Once again, I'm Greg Payson, National Secretary of the Socialist Party. I actually joined the party after hearing David McReynolds speak at May Day at Union Square in 1989. For better or worse, people have different takes on that. I think the speakers today and the speakers during the month across the United States, including our forum in Minneapolis on June 8th, where we'll have more speakers and more representatives from different movements, we'll explain what we have to contribute to the movement, what a democratic socialist, a specific democratic socialist point of view, a radical point of view. It wants fundamental change in the economy, public ownership and democratic control, democratic worker and community control. It's very important that the communities have a say. It's just not the workers at the factories, but the communities around the factories, the people who live, the people who go to school. This is the vision we bring, a very grassroots movement, not top-down, very bottom-up. And I believe the Socialist Party USA, the party I belong to, the party with the 40 years of reconstitution and 112 years of long history, can bring that to debate, to build the movement, to build a larger democratic socialist movement in this country so we can make this fundamental change. I invite everybody to join us for the rest of our events in May. We'll be web streaming many of these events online, and hopefully we'll have events in Minneapolis, Los Angeles, Chicago, and other events where we can web stream. Thank you, and for anybody watching this online, you can check out the Socialist Party at socialistparty-usa.org. Thank you.